Most traders search for the next big edge, the perfect setup, the secret system, the formula that will finally make them consistent. But they forget the most powerful edge of all, the one sitting quietly inside their own awareness. You can't improve what you refuse to see, and you can't see what you never record. Every impulse, every hesitation, every emotional swing leaves a trace not on your chart, but in your mind. A trading journal isn't just paper and ink, it's the mirror that shows you those traces, the mirror that most traders are too afraid to face. Because journaling doesn't just reveal what you did, it reveals who you are when you trade. And that truth is the first step toward mastery. This is the story of how writing, not trading, transformed the way I see the market and myself. Welcome to Mind Over Markets. I used to think journaling was something beginners did, something you did at the start of your journey when you were trying to figure things out. But once you were good, once you had experience, you didn't need it anymore. That's what I believed. I couldn't have been more wrong. It took me years to realize that trading without journaling is like walking through fog and pretending you know the way. You don't. You're just moving, hoping to end up somewhere familiar. And sometimes you do, but more often you end up exactly where you started, repeating the same mistake with a different chart. I didn't understand it at the time, but my biggest losses weren't from bad trades. They were from unobserved emotions, from patterns I couldn't see because I never bothered to write them down. Every time I overtraded, every time I cut a winner short, every time I chased a move out of fear, it was the same story playing out through a different chart. But I was too blind to recognize the main character, me. That's what journaling does. It turns the chaos of your decisions into a mirror most traders are afraid to look into. At first I resisted it. I didn't want to face what I'd find there, the inconsistency, the impulsivity, the small lies I told myself to justify bad trades. I thought journaling would slow me down. In reality, it saved me, because journaling is not about recording what happened. It's about seeing what actually drives what happens. Most traders believe they're documenting trades, but what they're really documenting is their state of mind. Every entry, every exit, every hesitation, all of it stems from emotion. And if you never track those emotions, you'll spend years fighting the wrong battle. The first time I opened a blank page and wrote about a trade, I remember feeling ridiculous. Who was I writing to myself? What was I supposed to say? I bought here, I sold there. That felt pointless. But then something happened. As I started describing how I felt when I entered the trade, what I was thinking, what I feared, the page started talking back. I saw how often I entered not because the setup was good, but because I was bored. How often I moved my stop loss not because the data changed, but because I couldn't stand being wrong. It was brutal honesty, the kind I never found in charts or indicators. That's when I understood journaling is not a tool for trading better. It's a tool for seeing yourself clearly. And clarity is the foundation of every good decision. When you start journaling honestly, you realize something uncomfortable. You are not a rational trader. You are a human being with fear, hope, and ego pretending to be rational. And that's okay. The goal isn't to eliminate those emotions. It's to recognize them before they hijack your next trade. At some point, I stopped journaling about setups. I started journaling about states. I'd write, "Today I felt anxious before the London Open. I noticed tension in my chest before hitting buy. I felt relief after closing early, even though it was against plan." Those small observations became my roadmap because they showed me where emotion quietly controlled behavior. Patterns began to appear, not in the market, in me. I realized I had emotional cycles. On Mondays, I was eager to prove something. By Wednesday, I became cautious. By Friday, I was impulsive, chasing one last trade to finish strong. It was the same week on repeat, the same emotions, just wearing different charts. You can't see that from equity curves. You can only see it from pages of reflection. I used to think data was king. Now I think awareness is. Because the more aware you become of your own emotional rhythm, the less power those emotions have over you. The market doesn't care what you feel, but your actions do. Every click is a vote for the mindset that created it. And if that mindset goes unexamined, it becomes your default operating system. That's what a journal changes. It brings those hidden operating systems to light. It forces you to face how often you trade from fear, how often you break rules for comfort, how often you let one loss define your confidence. It's confronting, but it's liberating. Because once you see your patterns, you can rewrite them. The journal became my quiet therapist. It never judged, never interrupted, never told me what to do. It just reflected truth. And truth, even when painful, is freeing. Some days I'd finish journaling and feel lighter, like I'd emptied the noise in my head onto the page. Other days it was brutal. I'd realize I was still the same trader I promised I wouldn't be. But even that was progress, because awareness is the first step toward change. The more I wrote, the more I began to understand the subtle difference between reacting and observing. When you don't journal, emotions drive your actions unconsciously. When you do journal, you create distance. You start noticing, there's that fear again. You begin to watch it, not be it. That distance is everything. It's the difference between a trader trapped inside emotion and a trader who can trade through emotion. Journaling, I realized, isn't about memory. It's about mindfulness. It turns trading into a feedback loop of awareness. You act, you record, you reflect, you evolve. That cycle is how professionals grow, not by avoiding mistakes, but by learning deeply from them. And yet most traders don't journal. They say it's boring. They say they don't have time. But what they really mean is they don't want to face themselves. Because journaling strips away excuses. It exposes you. It's easier to blame the market than to admit you acted out of fear. It's easier to chase a new system than to confront the fact that you didn't follow the old one. Journaling takes courage not to write, but to see. And once you see, you can't unsee. You start catching yourself mid-trade, recognizing the emotional fingerprint of a mistake before it happens. That's the magic of reflection. It turns hindsight into foresight. At some point, the journal stopped being a notebook and became a compass. Every page pointed me back to the same truth. My results were not a reflection of market randomness, they were a reflection of my self-awareness. The more I wrote, the clearer that truth became. The journal wasn't about trades, it was about transformation. At first, I thought my journal needed to be perfect, organized, color-coded, filled with statistics and screenshots. But over time, I learned that what mattered most wasn't how the journal looked. It was how honest it felt. I stopped caring about aesthetics and started caring about truth. Because truth is messy. It doesn't fit into neat columns or perfect spreadsheets. Sometimes it's a shaky sentence written after a loss. Sometimes it's a single word, angry, tired, afraid. Those words told me more about my trading than any metric ever could. When I opened the journal each morning, I didn't just write about setups. I wrote about state. I'd ask myself, how am I feeling today? Am I calm, rested, impatient? Some days the answer came quickly. Other days I didn't know until I started writing. That became my ritual, the before trade entry. Before I even opened the chart, I opened myself. Because if my mind wasn't stable, no system would save me. And the page somehow always told me the truth I didn't want to hear. There were mornings I could already see the storm inside me, the need to prove something, the tension in my shoulders, the quiet rush to make back what I lost yesterday. If I ignored those signals, the day usually ended badly. But if I wrote them down, acknowledged them, they lost their power. Awareness diluted emotion. So the first rule I wrote for myself was simple journal. Before you trade, not after. Because your pre-market mind writes the script that your trades will later follow. Then came the during trade entries. I used to think journaling while trading would distract me, but it didn't. It anchored me. When I felt that spike of adrenaline as price neared my stop, I'd type a short note, heart racing fear, rising. When I wanted to move my take profit, I'd write urge to control outcome. Those small phrases became timestamps of emotion. Later, when I reviewed the trade, I could see how every decision matched a feeling. The data wasn't just numbers anymore, it had heartbeat. It was humbling to see how predictable I was. The same emotional sequence kept playing anxiety before entry, hope when in profit, fear near reversal, regret after exit. It wasn't the market changing, it was me repeating. And that's what journaling exposed: the loops, the invisible patterns that lived beneath my charts. Once I saw them, I couldn't pretend anymore. I realized I didn't have trading problems. I had emotional patterns, pretending to be trading problems. After every session, I'd complete the third part, the after-trade reflection. This was the hardest, because it required honesty, not analysis. I'd write questions like, did I follow my plan? What emotion decided my exit? What belief drove my entry? Sometimes the answers hurt, but they were pure. And purity is where growth hides. At first, reviewing those entries felt like reliving mistakes. But slowly it started to feel like watching someone else, a younger version of me, making choices from fear. That distance created compassion instead of criticism. I stopped punishing myself for being emotional and started studying it instead. Each reflection turned judgment into understanding. It's funny, people think journaling is about control. It's not. It's about awareness. You don't write to fix yourself. You write to see yourself, because once you see clearly, change happens naturally. I began to notice that the more consistently I journaled, the calmer I became in live trades. Not because I forced discipline, but because I had rehearsed awareness so many times on paper that it became muscle memory. The page trained my mind like a mirror trains your posture. Journaling also taught me patience, not only with trades, but with progress. Every entry reminded me that mastery isn't built in days. It's built in pages. Each sentence was a small step away from impulsivity and toward intention. Sometimes I'd go back and read old entries. They were raw, almost painful. Lines like, I don't trust myself anymore, or I'm scared to enter after losing streaks. But those sentences were milestones. They marked where awareness began. Because you can't heal what you refuse to write. And there's something sacred about seeing your evolution in ink, the slow shift from chaos to clarity. You realize that the market didn't change. Your perception did. Over time, my journal turned into a dialogue between two versions of myself, the one who reacted and the one who observed. And eventually the observer became stronger. The page trained me to pause, to breathe, to recognize that every emotional urge was just a thought passing through, not truth, not command, just weather. That's when I understood a trading journal isn't just for review, it's for reprogramming. Every time you record emotion without acting on it, you teach your nervous system a new language, one of calm awareness instead of panic. That's what professionals mean when they say process over outcome. Because process isn't just what you do, it's who you become by doing it consciously. So I built a simple template, not for perfection, but for consistency. 3 sections. 1 intention to stay awake. Before the trade awareness. Write your emotional state, energy level, and intentions. During the trade observation. Notice thoughts and impulses as they arise, but don't judge them. After the trade reflection. Record truthfully what drove each decision and what you learned about yourself. That's it. No fancy charts, no color codes, just awareness, honesty, repetition. And over time, that repetition rewired my behavior more deeply than any strategy ever did. Because strategies change, Markets change, but self-awareness compounds. The more aware you become, the less control emotion has. And the less emotion controls you, the more consistent you become. Not perfect consistent. There's a quiet difference between the two. Consistency is born from alignment, not effort. When what you feel, think, and do move in the same direction, trading becomes peaceful again. And journaling is what aligns them. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make good social media posts, but it's the quiet work that builds professional minds. And in trading, your mind is the only tool that never expires. I used to chase new systems every time I lost. Now I chase understanding, because a single insight about myself is worth more than 100 backtests. That insight comes from the page. The journal became my accountability partner, my therapist, my teacher. But most of all, it became my mirror. Every time I wrote, I looked into it, and every time it reflected back the trader I was becoming. I used to think the purpose of a trading journal was to document results. But over time, I realized it's not about recording performance. It's about revealing patterns, especially the ones you don't want to see. Every time I reviewed my journal, I saw the same invisible fingerprints. Moments when fear disguised itself as logic. Moments when boredom pretended to be opportunity. Moments when ego whispered just one more trade, you deserve it. I hadn't noticed those voices before, but on the page they were loud. Because the journal doesn't lie. It doesn't care about your excuses or intentions. It simply shows you the truth you left behind. And that truth is humbling. There were times I'd scroll through a week's worth of notes and realize every bad trade came from the same emotion, impatience. Not bad setups, not poor analysis, just the inability to wait. The same feeling that used to make me refresh charts compulsively, the same restlessness that made me take trades I didn't need. The pattern wasn't random. It was predictable. It was me. That's when I stopped using my journal as a log and started using it as a lens that magnified the subtleties of my psychology. When I felt anxious, I learned to ask, what belief is being threatened right now? When I felt greedy, I asked, what am I trying to prove? Those questions turned every trade into a therapy session, and the market became the most honest therapist I've ever had, because it never lies. It reflects, and the journal is the record of that reflection. The more I wrote, the more I began to see that journaling isn't just about understanding emotion, it's about building emotional endurance. When you write down your thoughts instead of reacting to them, you practice sitting with discomfort. You develop the ability to watch an impulse instead of obeying it. That's patience in its purest form. Most traders think patience is about time, but it's not. It's about tolerance, the tolerance for uncertainty, the capacity to sit with not knowing without breaking. And that muscle grows with every page. I started to notice the difference in how I felt after writing. When I dumped my thoughts onto paper, the noise inside my head got quieter. Decisions became slower, cleaner. The trades felt less emotional. The urge to interfere started fading. That's when I realized something subtle journaling was training my nervous system. Every sentence I wrote was like a breath, an exhale of tension, a pause between stimulus and response. That pause, that's where control lives. Without the journal, my emotions moved faster than my awareness. But with it, awareness started catching up. Eventually, it began leading. Somewhere along the line, the act of journaling stopped being about fixing mistakes and became about understanding patterns of consciousness. I began noticing how my trading behavior mirrored my life, how impatience in the market reflected impatience everywhere else, how needing to be right in a trade came from needing validation in other areas. The line between trader and person blurred. And that's when true growth began, because you can't separate who you are from how you trade. You can't expect discipline in markets if you live undisciplined outside of them. You can't expect patience in trades if you rush everything else in life. The journal showed me that trading isn't just about money, it's a mirror for character. The more I reflected, the more patterns I found not just in emotion, but in story. The stories I told myself before entering trades. This one's different. I'll just risk small. I'll stop after this one. Small lies that sounded rational in the moment but revealed deep insecurity underneath. The journal exposed those stories. It turned them into text I could see. And when you can see your story, you can rewrite it. That's the real power of journaling. It's not about collecting notes, it's about editing identity. Over time, the entries became gentler, fewer words, more clarity. Instead of paragraphs of frustration, I'd write short truths like, I felt fear, I waited, it passed, or I wanted control, I breathed, I let it go. Those lines became affirmations, not forced positivity, but recorded evidence of growth. It felt like my mind was slowly reorganizing itself through the act of writing. Thoughts that used to dominate me began dissolving faster. I didn't need to fight emotion anymore. I could just recognize it and move through it. The journal also changed how I reviewed performance. Before, I'd open my stats and fixate on win rate, RR, drawdown. But now I looked for patterns of alignment. How many trades followed plan? How often did I act from awareness instead of reaction? How often did I trade my edge instead of my mood? Those became my new metrics. And they told a clearer story of progress than any P&L ever could, because profits fluctuate, but awareness compounds. The traders who journal with consistency don't just become more disciplined, they become more objective. And objectivity is emotional freedom. When you can see reality without distortion, you make decisions that align with truth, not fear. Somewhere in that process, I stopped chasing perfect trades and started chasing perfect presence. I didn't need to catch every move. I needed to witness every moment. The journal became my practice ground for presence, a meditation in ink. Each page was a confession, a lesson, a release. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about awareness, because awareness always wins. There were days I didn't feel like writing. Days I felt drained, burned out, disconnected. But those were the most important days to write, because silence hides regression. Writing even a single line kept me anchored. It reminded me that reflection is a form of discipline, and discipline is love for the future version of yourself who will read these words one day and thank you. That's what I think now whenever I open the journal. I'm not writing for today's trader. I'm writing for tomorrow's one, the version who will read this and see how far I've come. The version who will learn from the mistakes I was brave enough to record. The page doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the rarest edge in trading. Part 4, Becoming the Observer. There was a day not long ago when I sat down to journal and realized I had nothing left to confess. Not because I was perfect, but because I had stopped hiding from myself. The words no longer came from guilt or self-judgment. They came from curiosity. I wasn't asking, why did I mess up again? I was asking, what did I learn about myself this time? That shift changed everything. The page stopped feeling like a report card and started feeling like a dialogue between awareness and experience, between who I was and who I was becoming. I no longer saw my journal as a tool for improvement. It became a ritual of alignment, a quiet reminder that every trade is an opportunity to return to presence, that every mistake is simply feedback. Trading without a journal used to feel like speed. Now it feels like blindness. Because without reflection, you can't see where you're going. You only see what you want to see. But when you write, the fog lifts. You start noticing patterns of thought, patterns of energy, patterns of self-talk. And those patterns tell you everything you need to know about your results. Journaling doesn't make you a perfect trader. It makes you an aware one. And awareness changes behavior without force. It softens reaction. It slows time. It teaches patience in a way no system ever could. When you write about your trades, you begin to see the hidden thread running through them, the emotional logic behind every click. You start realizing how your need for certainty shapes your risk, how your fear of missing out shapes your timing, how your desire for validation shapes your exits. And the moment you recognize those forces, they lose control over you. That's the quiet power of the journal. It doesn't shout. It doesn't promise success. It simply holds space for truth. I used to be afraid to look at my past trades. Now, I look forward to it because every page is proof of transformation. The early entries are full of chaos, anger, frustration, self-doubt. But as the pages turn, the tone changes. The words slow down. The sentences shorten. There's more acceptance, less noise. That's what growth looks like, not louder confidence, but quieter understanding. Sometimes I read those old entries just to remind myself how far I've come, not in profits, but in peace. Because profits can vanish, peace doesn't. The market still moves the same way it always has, unpredictable, chaotic, untamed. But I don't need it to behave anymore, because I've learned to observe without attaching, to let the market be the market, and let me be me. That's what journaling taught me, detachment. Not the cold, emotionless kind that denies feeling, but the kind that embraces it fully and lets it pass. To feel fear and still hold. To feel excitement and still wait. To feel uncertainty and still act with clarity. That's discipline, not resistance presence. Somewhere along this journey, I stopped identifying as a trader who journals and became a person who reflects. Because the habit leaked into everything else. I started journaling outside of trading about conversations, decisions, habits. The same awareness that stabilized my trades began stabilizing my life, and that's when I understood trading psychology isn't separate from life psychology. They're the same field, just different charts. The more I reflected, the less I reacted in markets, in relationships, in everything. Patience stopped being a strategy. It became a way of being. When I look back now, I can see that the journal didn't just track my progress. It transformed it. It turned the impulsive trader into an observer, the observer into a student, and the student into a professional. That's the real purpose of journaling, not to record, but to remember who you are when the noise fades, to remember that clarity always exists beneath confusion, to remember that awareness, once written, becomes wisdom. So I keep writing, not because I have to, but because I want to stay awake, because I know how easy it is to drift, to let success dull awareness, to let confidence turn into carelessness. The journal keeps me honest. It anchors me in humility. It reminds me that mastery isn't control, it's consistency. Each time I close the notebook, I feel the same quiet gratitude for the market that challenged me, for the losses that humbled me, for the pages that witnessed my evolution. I used to chase external edges. Now I protect an internal one, awareness, because awareness never expires. It never stops compounding, and it never lies. If you ever wonder where discipline comes from, look at your journal. If you ever lose confidence, read your own words. If you ever forget why you started, let your past remind you. The journal doesn't promise success. It promises understanding. And understanding in this game is everything. Because when you truly know yourself, when you can watch emotion rise and fall without letting it move your hand, you've already won. You no longer need to fight the market. You no longer need to fight yourself. You simply observe, you write, you learn, you grow, and one day you realize that the journal isn't just about trading. It's about awakening. That's the quiet edge the pros never talk about. Not hidden indicators, not secret systems, but a mind that sees clearly because it's reflected often. So if you ask me now how to journal like a professional trader, I'd say this: don't write to remember your trades. Write to remember your truth. Because in the end, every chart resets, every profit fades. But awareness stays. And awareness is the real wealth. In the end, every chart resets. The candles fade, the profits and losses blur into memory. But the words you've written, they remain. Your journal becomes the map of your evolution. Each page a lesson in awareness, each line a moment of honesty, each reflection a reminder that discipline isn't about control, it's about clarity. The pros don't write for results, they write for reflection. Because awareness is the only edge that never expires. So keep writing, keep reflecting, and keep becoming the kind of trader who no longer needs the market to feel complete. Because when you master awareness, you've already mastered the trade. This is mind over markets.